It's been nearly a year since Apple launched the iPhone 16e, and I think the best way to describe it in one word is misunderstood. I think it wasn't until I watched X-Men First Class that I learned to appreciate the character of Magneto. It was easy to see him as a villain, but in reality, his upbringing was more than enough of a motive for his drive to protect those he loved to be something hard to relate for anyone else. In that same tangent, reviews are biased by design, mostly motivated by the things you or I care about. If, like me, you had access to all iPhone models, there's a high possibility that you'd pick a different iPhone than I would, as content creation is my priority, but maybe not yours, and this right here is the problem. This iPhone 16e was not necessarily the device that I'd personally pick for myself, but 11 months later, I did learn why it was a no-brainer for a lot of people around me. I'm Jaime Rivera, and it's time for another episode of How It Started, How It's Going. I think the most important thing I learned about this iPhone is that Apple really wasn't intending to launch a sequel to the iPhone SE. Those special edition phones served their time, either to solve the need for a smaller iPhone at first, or to keep some of the experience some wanted from the first 10 years of iPhone. The E, by contrast, felt like an intentional product that sure was a bit more affordable, but mainly because for some people, the rest of the iPhones are actually more like overkill. Take hardware, for example. People like my dad avoid buying cheaper phones because they're usually not durable, and well, this device wasn't really built as a cheap phone. I think the frame is based on the iPhone 14 in both materials and essentials like ceramic shield, and most of the design cues that make it look like a modern iPhone. 1 year later, and well, it looks pretty much brand new. I actually used it a lot more than I expected, given one specific reason I'll discuss later, and yeah, no sort of substantial wear or tear. Maybe the only controversial part that's missing in this build is the lack of the MagSafe magnets, which I'll admit I use every single day either on my car, bike, or with other convenient accessories. It's become such an essential iPhone experience since the iPhone 12 that I'm not gonna lie, I did miss. But in everything else, this was pretty much the usual iPhone experience you've come to know. Now, when you consider internals, my teenage son loves to game on his phone, and this device is pretty stacked up. Same A18 chip as last year's iPhone 16, which performed just as well, even with one less GPU core. It brings the same RAM and storage options as even the iPhone 17, but then brings a larger battery at less overall weight, which paired with Apple's C1 modem, has proven to be the legendary combo for endurance. The display is then another point of controversy because I love an always-on display, but then I also know a ton of people who either switch it off to get more endurance or who have all the information they want from their Apple Watch. In everything else, this panel brings the standard Super Retina XDR color I've praised for years, and even if the brightness wasn't as good in paper when compared to other iPhones, I'll admit I didn't really feel cheaped out in real-world use. Heck, even the speakers were pretty top-notch. Each colorway softens the appeal for anyone that wants it. And then when it comes to software, let me just be frank, I know too many people who would rather abuse an older hand-me-down iPhone than an Android phone. And I don't even think it's because one is better than the other. Apple has just done a really good job at creating ecosystems that have turned the iPhone into an aspirational product in ways that very few Android OEMs have achieved. My kids, for example, have access to any of the most powerful Android phones they could want, and nope, they're happy with an iPhone 14 Plus or a 14 Pro from 4 years ago. For some, it's the blue bubbles and the sense of belonging. For others, it's FaceTime. For me, it's that, in my opinion, iOS continues to have the best parental controls. And sure, I could tell you that I like how iOS 26 has worked on this less expensive iPhone since day one, which it has, but that's par for the course. My younger kids are due for an upgrade this year, and yeah, I don't plan to spend more than on this 16e. And so long as they're getting an iPhone, they're cool about it, and that says loads of why this phone exists as well. Now, going back to the case of my dad, for him, he needs a phone that is more like a workhorse, and I think this is easily the iPhone with some of the best battery life. It's proven to be reliable for phone calls as I've tried it on the Verizon network, and I've documented how well the C1 behaves in tough scenarios like concerts, better than other phones running on modems that some companies claim to be superior. Software feels snappy, performance feels as good as every other iPhone, though yeah, I'm gonna be real, I do wish there were higher refresh rate at times when I tested it with a few games here and there. Now, regardless of how important the camera is for most people, I do have friends and family that just wanted to take good photos, and where multiple angles are nice to have, but not essential. As such, this phone pretty much uses the same primary sensor as the $1,000 iPhone Air, which even includes the separate imaging pipelines and fusion camera features as its most expensive siblings, though with the benefit of the older color profiles like rich contrast, which I adored on previous iPhones, and the results over a year of use speak for themselves. I do love the character these photos provide, with the added contrast helping these look more like the results I'd get from a camera, instead of what we've come accustomed to from an iPhone. Matched with the fusion camera approach, you get less of the overly done highlights and yet enough dynamic range for each photo to be pleasing. Sticking to 1x, you also get 24 megapixel results, by the way, which is hard to find in most phones at this price point. And then switch to 2x and you're still getting 12 megapixel results, which, yes, is my favorite look for street photography, mimicking a 50mm focal length, though at the expense of some dynamic range, which is where the most expensive iPhone Air has better processing, and the iPhone 17 the added kick of an ultra-wide. I seriously wish this phone had a squared sensor in order to mimic an ultra-wide and then give you those 3 focal lengths instead of 2, all while using just one sensor. This is mostly noticeable at night, where 1x will give you both speed and better dynamic range than if you were abusing the 2x, and yet I do think this phone will make most products on its price range look bad. And yeah, that includes Google's Pixel 9a in how Apple does a better job in pulling in detail. Portraits are okay. I mean, you can't really ask for miracles without the extra lens to calculate true separation, but I have to give it to Apple for how the company eases that off with darkening the borders to make it look more natural. It's almost the way I feel about selfies, where they're good, but man, I do wish center stage was here, because that squared sensor really has me spoiled. Maybe where I'm most surprised is in video, because I'd easily say this is the best phone at this price point for it. You're pretty much getting the results I've praised from the base iPhone 17, which mean great dynamic range, color and stabilization, and where 2x piggybacks on the benefit that it's pulling that data from the primary, so all things come included. And then same thing with selfie video, where again, this phone is behaving just like every other high-end iPhone. Like seriously, if I were on a budget, even as a content creator, and all I could pick was just one phone for what I do, I'd totally pick this iPhone over any of its Android competitors for its video results alone. To conclude, what can I say? I'd be lying if I told you that this is the iPhone for me, but after using it on and off for the past year, I totally do understand who it's for. Some people just want an iPhone, be it for the ecosystem or for the status, or for the reliability or the quality or the longevity of support. But then they either want quality but don't want to pay a lot like my dad, or are dependents like my kids. For them, this is definitely a far better solution, in my opinion, than a hand-me-down phone or refurb with the usual wear and tear or lack of warranty. This is not a question of whether there are better phones in either specs or features for even less money in the Android world. We already know the answer. Like seriously, of course there are. The Pixel 9a and the OnePlus 15R are just a few of many options out there. The problem is that once you look at sales figures for the last quarter, to have Apple leading the world in sales with a lot less products than every single one of its competitors is a statement. Even for Apple's own standards, iPhone sales are up an insane 23% last quarter as well. And obviously, the iPhone 16e is most likely not what drove those sales, but it's a clear indication that Apple understands its consumers better than most companies. And this phone proved to be a good representation of just that. Now, let me know if you agree with my assessment in the comments below, and while you're at it, please like, subscribe, and join the conversation in the comments, as I'm sure you've seen me try to respond to as many as I can. Also, follow me on social media as more behind-the-scenes work continues to happen there as I test these phones in the day-to-day. Guys, our Technically There podcast with Josh is returning very soon, so stay tuned for some very cool episodes coming very soon. I'm Jaime Rivera. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.